24 public hearing budget meeting to order. Regarding item number 1, meeting opening, this meeting is being recorded, and we'll move to action item 2, roll call and verification of quorum.
Okay. We have 3 people that are excused, Ms. Erler, Mr. Kowalski, and Mr. Pope. So Mr. Lepak?
Here.
Ms. Portson?
Here.
Mr. Robbie?
Here.
Mr. Shader?
Here.
Mr. Summers?
Here.
And Ms. Bushman?
Here.
And we have a quorum.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 3, public hearing of the 2024-2025 school district budget presentation. We have Dr. Owens.
Well, good evening, everybody. I will try to move this through rapidly so as not to bore you. As we look at the slides up there, the next slide points to the fact that there are 4 sections to the budget. I'm referring to this document right here that you have at your place. This is the new budget that's put out, and this book is sectioned off into 4 sections: an executive session, organizational section, finance, and information section. The first section is really designed also to be able to be removed and provide information in and of itself as a separate document if necessary. The next slide in that you see and you have in your background is found on page 10 of this book, budget book. It's the tax levy summary. And what's interesting about this is that this particular page is loaded with information just in its presentation of itself. The column on the left, of course, has the names of the funds that are involved in the total budget. You have an expenditure column, which totals $145,726,697, and then the 2 revenue columns labeled revenue and tax levy total $144,840,967. That number is on the left side, just below the word total. I put that off to the side so as not to get it confused with the other numbers on the right-hand side of this document that are more important at this point. That total number of revenue is also explained on page 37 of the budget. We'll get to that in a moment. That's a couple of slides coming up. Anyway, the other thing that's really interesting here, of course, is the total of the right-hand side, the tax levy, that totals up. It shows you the 3 funds that carry a levy: the general fund, the debt service, and the community services. The 24-25 levy is just over 43 million. The increase in the levy is $383,000. So our total levy is increasing less than 1%. It's only 0.9%. So that's encouraging, that's great. The equalized value of the district is just $6.7 billion, just over that. It's gone up from the previous year. That's a growth of 5.71%. Our levy rate is $6.40 for this new year. Previous year it was $6.70, so it's gone down 30 cents per thousand. I should also point out that during the referendum, we projected that it would possibly go up to $6.83, so it's considerably less than that projection by 43 cents. So that's encouraging as well. Of course, I just remind you that these levy rates are equalized levy rates or fair market value, and they don't necessarily transport directly across to the assessed values of the particular municipalities, because we assess, levy municipalities, not individual properties. The next slide shows you the fund balances and also shows you the revenue and expenditure of the general fund in the top portion. And you'll see a note there, it's a surplus. This budget is projected to have a surplus of almost $105,000. But I put the percent in there so that you didn't get too terribly excited about that surplus. That's really 0.96. It's less than 1/10 of 1%. So it's a tight budget. Depending on the performance of this budget, we could go in deficit or we could remain in surplus. It all depends on the forces of things that happen throughout the year. How cold the winter gets and all of those, how high fuel prices go and changes, things we can't control, all those types of things. And then we have of course, our special project fund, which is in balance, our debt service, which shows a decline, which it should because we're paying off debt and there's a little offset with the fiscal year. The next slide shows some more funds, the capital projects funds, which it's a 46 fund that you guys approved in the 10-year plan. Then next is the food service budget, and then finally the community service fund, which is a small amount there. On the next slide, I mentioned you'd be seeing this. This is found on page 37 also of your book. This is right from that page, and that's the revenue by source. Down on the left-hand side of the column there, you'll see source code numbers as well as names, descriptions. The 200s tend to be local. The 300s are intermediate type stuff. 500s are revenue from the state. 600s, intermediate revenues. 600s are revenue from the state. 700 codes are from the federal government, et cetera. So the first column you see is labeled general, then you go across to the various funds that we just talked about on the first slide, which was the general fund, the special projects, debt service, capital projects, food service, and trust, which we no longer operate, and then community services. So that's how that stacks up, et cetera. The next two slides are going to be different presentations of expenditure accounts. This is expenditure by objects. This is like, I think I've mentioned before in some of our meetings, like a pen is an object 411, which is a supply item. So that would be under non-capital objects, et cetera. So you're describing the object in which the expenditure is being used. It could be salary, benefits, or like I mentioned, purchase services or non-capital objects. And those totals, of course, all match up. And if you go to the far right, you see 145,000, 700 and some thousand, which matches up. The next slide is a presentation of expense, but in this case, the expenditure is by function. And you see in the upper side, it starts off with the 100s, and then you see a little ways down in bold, it says instruction. Well, that's because all the 100s are instruction. That's defined as the teacher in front of the students in a classroom. And the 120,000 is regular curriculum, which actually goes alphabetically. 121 is art, 120 English, and then 123 is foreign language, and then it just goes right through science, social studies. It doesn't always hold true throughout the whole book, of course, but it does in the regular curriculum. Then you have vocational, Phi-Ed, et cetera. Then you get into the 200s, which support the instructional areas. You have pupil services, instructional staff, and you get general administration, school building administration, principals, and things like that. And you go right down through various types of things, including interfund transfers and whatnot like that, which are down in the 400s. So that's just a different way of laying out the expenditure. Question, sir?
Yeah, I have a question on the community service fund, the fund 80.
I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
The community service fund, the fund 80.
Yes.
Last year went from 571 and now it's 745.
Yes. We increased that. There's a Boys and Girls Club project that we're working with, and we're going to be looking at promoting that and building that. I don't know if you want to.
Before and after school programming, Boys and Girls Club received a grant, but the district is going to pay a portion of that cost just so that students can get before and after school care. The numbers have increased, and we didn't want to turn any students away. It had like a 2-cent impact on the levy. So we thought that made sense to do.
And we should point out that that opportunity is open to every child in the district, regardless of the school they're attending, because it's under a community service fund. It is definitely not exclusive to our students, and we want to make sure that we adhere to that policy. The next slide is getting into a presentation on the revenue limit. This document, of course, is not in the budget book itself. This is the revenue limit worksheet. You have a copy of it in your that I made available to you, so it's a little easier for you to see probably close up than it is up there. But the top portion, excuse me, this is page 1 of the document, which really is more of a calculation area. The upper portion of that is from last year, and those numbers are added up until you get to that green line there, which reads 78,000. That carries over to line 1 on page 2, we'll see in a little bit here. And that's how we start off the calculation of the revenue limit for this current year. In the middle, you will see the 3-year rolling average actually present itself. You have 2021 through 23, and then below that, the 2021 year data drops out, and you have 22 to 24. So those are the comparison of the 2 3-year rolling averages and the change. So in the first year rolling average, we had 7,112 students for revenue limit purposes. And in the next 3 years, we had 7,104. So we had a decline of 8 students for revenue limit purposes. And that will create a one-time only declining enrollment exemption of a little over $90,000. If we do not replace those 8 students next year, that $90,000 will go away and it will not come back. And at the very bottom, you have 6.7 billion. That is our equalized value for the district, TIF out. So all the tax incremental financing district data is not included in that, nor should it be, as the way it works. On the next slide, this starts off the very first upper right-hand box. Excuse me, line 1 is that 78 million that's carried over from that page 1. And that's divided by the first 3-year rolling average to come up with $11,008.59 per pupil, to which we add $325. Then we get $11,333.59, and you multiply that by the new 3-year rolling average of 7,104, and you come up with our first number of $80.5 million in revenue limit calculation. And then as you fall down through that, you get total recurring exemptions. That includes the first year of the referendum, $8,750,000, and you come up with $89,326,219. And then you have what they call non-recurring exemptions that are added up there. Those are the Wisconsin public choice, parental choice programs, and the special needs scholarship programs and some other things that add up into that. That's added together, and that gives you 94.8 million, from which you then subtract the total aid, the general aid, plus there's a couple of aid things there for personal property and things like that. And you get down to the revenue limit, less general aid, which is the maximum amount of tax levy for 10 and 38 fund that we can levy. We can't levy any more than that by law. And then you add to that number other levies like your debt service from 39 fund and community ed, and you get the total of all funds, which is 43,030,626. That's the number I showed you on the very first page, our total levy, which went up by 0.9%. And then the levy rate there, when you divide that by the 6.7 billion, that's how you get the 6.396, which is rounded up to $6.40. So that's kind of a quick pass through that revenue limit worksheet. The next slide is kind of interesting because it gives you an opportunity to see the change in equalized value by municipality. Again, we levy by municipality, not by property itself, an individual's property. So it's interesting to watch the change that takes place. If you notice, the total average of our increase in equalized value is 5.71%. Again, interesting bit of information from the very first page. That's why there's so much on that first page. It's incredible when you really look at it. But that's an average. So as you vary from that average, it gives you an indication of what might happen with the amount of levy that goes to that specific municipality. You can also find this chart on page 42 of your budget book. Stevens Point only went up 1%. So their impact on what their levy is going to go up is going to be quite a bit lower than it was in the previous year if it only went up 1%, see? And then Plover, also, town of Plover, went up 2.66%, so that's quite low compared to the 5.71 average. But then if you look at Grant, they went up almost 6%, 18.6. Now, it's a smaller dollar amount. Their total percent of our whole district is less than 1%. So dollar-wise, it's not so impactful, but it does shift. It will wind up shifting the levy proportions. And then Buena Vista went up 15.24. That's you, huh? Congratulations. But it's not going to impact you terribly much because, again, Buena Vista is only 0.86% of our total budget. So it's as a percentage of the whole thing, it's a high percent, but in total, it's not all that much money. Now, if you turn the page again, and you go to the next slide, which is level by municipality, you start to see the impact of that and what happens. The city of Stevens Point is actually going to go, its portion of the levy compared to last year is going to go down 3.6%. So if you live in Stevens Point, the school tax portion will go down 3.6 in terms of the levy. Plover, town of Plover will go down a little over 2%. Grant will increase 13.2, and Buena Vista 10%. Again, I don't know how, within those municipalities, I don't know what's going to happen with school levy tax credits and what they do in terms of their assessment and appropriation within that, but I can't speak to that. So that's kind of an effect. As you can see, every year the pie shifts a little bit. The main players still remain the main players, but there's shifting that occurs among the municipalities in terms of their growth relative to one another and the average of that. And that's kind of the way actually the aid formula works in the whole state too, really. That kind of comparison to the average and the shifting that occurs. That's not unlike what we do, the state does with the general aid formula and the state average and things like that. It's how you shift. The next slide, this is kind of, this is a key to understanding what happens. This is how we then actually wind up apportioning the levies out to the municipalities. And it's done in a way in which the process ensures equal and fair distribution among the levy of all parties, or in other words, all municipalities. So all municipalities are treated equally in terms of the share of the pie based on what the composition is for this year. So it's distributed in a fair and appropriate manner. And that's also found, as the notation says, on page 41 in your book. The next slide is blowing up. It's a large one. It's actually found on page 10 of your book, right along with that initial thing. And this is just showing you that information involved with private school vouchers. Please know that this information is included already in the total district levy. This is not a separate levy that's going to be added on to what was on page 10. It's all included in those numbers. It should be interesting to note that the combination of the vouchers has now gone up to a little over $3.3 million, which represents 7.8% of our total levy. So another way of saying that, of all that we're levying, 7.8% of that does not go to the school. It goes to the vouchers. We're forced to levy it, but it's not for our benefit. That goes to the voucher system. So that's why I put that in there, just to make you aware. It was a full disclosure of what's going on there. And then I provide that chart so that you can see in the table the distribution of what municipalities are paying what portion of the 3.3. And it is apportioned the same way the levy is. So, I mean, it's fair and appropriate in terms of the share of the district's municipalities. This slide is just showing you, using a constant $200,000, it's showing you that by going down 30 cents on a $200,000 home, that's a decline on a fair market value or equalized basis of $60. $30 on 100,000. You can extrapolate that as much as you want for whatever, figuring out your own property. Again, that's on an equalized or fair market value basis. The next slide, just wanted to kind of give you a ballpark. This is just a real general idea of what happened with this referendum money that we had. We got 8.7 million, and then we take $325 a pupil times the 7,104 students we had in a rolling average. We get another 2.3 million, takes us up to about 11 million. And you wouldn't think that could go fast, but wow, it sure does. 5.1 went like that just to catch us up and balance our budget. It doesn't replace fund balance, that just balances the budget from last year. Then 2.5 million in wages, 2.7 in benefits, 500,000 going towards the PJ Jacobs roof work, 100,000 going in health and safety aspect of it. I think that's related to PA system and some other things like that. And then hopefully that 100,000 I showed you as a surplus goes into fund balance. If we wind up with more money than that as surplus, that'll go into fund balance. But that's just a ballpark to show you and the taxpayers kind of what was happening with that money, et cetera. Now the next slides, I'm going to kind of go through these somewhat rapidly. This is just to show you some things of what happens after we levy, because there's also a thing called a school levy tax credit that appears on your bill, on your property tax bill. The state uses 2/3 funding, they call it, and they include equalization aid. They also include this, school levy tax credit. And to kind of just give you a little idea of what this is and how it works, take a look at the next slide. School levy tax credits are calculated and distributed based on the municipality share of statewide levies for school purposes during the preceding 3 years. So they use the 3-year rolling calculation also. It's on all levies in the state for school purposes. So the higher spending the communities will get higher amounts of school levy credit. That's the way that works. Next slide shows you some things. These are types of things that increase a typical levy. The revenue limit increase, low revenue ceiling increase, new voucher costs. This doesn't apply to us, elimination of high poverty aid. Successful referenda obviously would. And then the things that decrease the levy would be more equalization aid. It doesn't increase the amount of money we get. It doesn't increase the revenue limit. It just increases or decreases the levy, which is a good thing. And then it's in green after levy, a thing called a school levy tax credit. This is appearing after the school district creates and adopts the levy. And the next slide you see what we're talking about. There's two things, the equalization aid and school levy credit. And the equalization aid actually is used to help poorer value school districts that have lower equalized value or low spending in comparison to the state average. And then the school levy credit goes to property wealthy, high spending districts. It's kind of a balance where the legislature has been able to channel money towards both types of districts, school districts, and both types of political forces that have worked on them over the years. In the last biennial budget, and we're in the last year of that, the state increased levy credits by $590 million and state aid by $543 million. So there was some significant effort put in it too by the legislature. And to see how that works out, school district levy is plopped right in the middle there. Above that, that's a school district responsibility. We take the revenue limit formula, which I showed you, subtract out the state aid, and there you get the school district tax levy. That's what we talked about, that's going up 0.9%. Then after we levy this to the municipalities apply the school levy tax credit that they get from the state, and they come up with the net property tax. Now, I'll give you an example of this. This is just for purposes of discussion. It's not a final number, but on the next slide, you'll see mechanically kind of how this works. When we take our funds that we levy and we come across with a calculation and we see it's $6.40. Total levy increased $3.83. 0.9% increase, you see $6.40. Okay, so we levy that, and then the municipality takes the school levy credit. Last year was 8,700,000 some thousand. I don't know what it's going to be this year. I haven't seen it yet. But then you get a net levy. It could go down as much as $1 or whatever it goes down. This is just an example. But then, the real levy might be $5 and something, et cetera. So we can't be doing this. What was interesting is the school levy tax credit originally came out of general state aids. They took the money out of general state aids. Of course, that drove up the mill rate at the schools. And then they put it on the back end, like you see here, and dropped it down for the property taxpayer. It's a means of property tax relief, which is fine. It's good. And they've since added separate monies to that, as you saw with the 59 million or whatever the billion that went in. And then we wind up right where we started off with this very critical page, a very informative page. But again, it shows the levies only going up 383,000, 0.9%, and the mill rate is dropping by 30 cents to 6.40, and that's where we're at. So, subject to your questions. I guess this is a presentation, though. I guess we don't take questions, so you can ask me them later if you want. But I hope that's been helpful, and you understanding kind of how it came from, where it is, and again, I'd encourage you. This book just contains a ton of information on the budget, as well as other information that's informative as well. We wind up referring to it a lot during the school year, more than we ever realized we were going to. So we're kind of surprised a little bit by that, too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Owens. Okay, moving on to agenda item 3B, we have public comments. And we did not have anyone sign up for public comments. So moving on to agenda item 4, adjournment. I am looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Will, second by Barb. Discussion. Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Meeting adjourned.
Perfect. All right.